Buenas and half a day. The Guam Legislature is back in session. When we recessed yesterday, Senator Espaldon had the floor. We are discussing Bill 292-34. Senator, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Yesterday, there was an amendment that was proffered that would place the Attorney General's office, replace the boards and commissions in terms of developing policy, procedures, and education for the use of video teleconferencing and also video live streaming. And they would replace the, the board and commissions from developing the policy, procedures, and education with the Office of Attorney General. After the break, I was able to contact the Attorney General's office. They have some concerns, and I did articulate the concerns to the mover of the amendment. So I believe that she might have some amendments to this amendment at this time. So I will wait for those amendments to be made and then perhaps speak on the additions. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Speaker Terlahi. On the Terlahi amendment, any other member wish to speak? Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as the amendment is right now, I would have to object to it. Yesterday, I offered perhaps a compromise that the boards and commissions still would have to be part of developing the rules and regulations, and perhaps in coordination or consultation with the Office of the Attorney General and the Office of Technology. I think that would be a better route to take. I don't think, saying the Attorney General's office is now tasked to develop the rules and regs on how boards and commissions will conduct teleconferencing. I just don't think it's going to happen. There's so many things that the AG's office has priority in taking care of, and so if that is not made, then I would have to object to this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. There's been an objection. Any other member wish to be heard? If not, I will invite Speaker Terlahi to close.
All right. I am standing by my amendment. I think it could be improved if we want to say in consultation with. I don't object to that. But I think that this is the case, is that we have an open government law right now. It's very detailed. It's set into statute. All the boards and commissions follow the exact same open government law. They're not allowed to depart. I think if we're going to allow teleconferencing as part of the open government law, which this bill does, that it too should be incorporated into the law, and that every single agency should comply with the same requirements under the open government law. And in this particular case, in teleconferencing, there should be uniform requirements across the agency. And we really technically should be doing it here. If we want to say, implement this today, tomorrow, everybody comply this way. You have to give notice when you're going to use teleconferencing or whatever other details that we want to include in our telecom, but we're not. And we're saying, the bill currently says that all boards will come up with their rules independently. And I think that's a huge departure from the open government law practice, and it's a huge departure in the open government law's principle, in that we're going to require the government to comply the same way, so that all the public can know what the rules of engagement are. It's intended for their benefit, after all. so that they know how to participate. I think the only objection that one person in the AG's office might have had that talked with the senator and not me directly, but I've not got any formal objection from the Attorney General, is just a matter of resources. It's really a matter of who are we passing this buck to? Who's going to sit down and write the rules of teleconferencing, right? Apparently we are not, and the AG saying they're very busy, they may not, but really, who's going to write it? Every other agency who's not well-versed in the open government law? That's the issue that we're having in the government right now, is that boards and commissions are interpreting the open government law differently. The Attorney General this year, or last year, made it very clear she is going to conduct training across the boards and commissions. They all have to follow the same methodology, and that if they follow how she has advised them, then she can defend their use, their meetings as being in compliance. And that's really the goal, is we want what the boards and commissions are doing to be consistent with what the Attorney General says is compliant with the open government law. And the fastest way to get there, I thought, was to let the AG write the rules. If it's too much of a burden, the boards can write the rules if they're in a hurry and give it to her, but if we must keep the ultimate responsibility on the Attorney General's office. Rules and regs normally go to the Attorney General's office anyways. And so I just think this is actually a shortcut for the boards. And if the boards have any specific requirements, there's just nothing to prevent the AG from incorporating those. But our open government right now does not do that. I mean, it does that by statute. It says the legislature, we have an exemption from the open government law for meetings versus hearings versus session. And so I just think there's no reason to let a board make a specific rule that's not going to apply to all the other boards. I think, so I just think this is the best way to do it. And I think if you look at the words on the amendment, the Attorney General's office shall develop policy, procedures, and education. Education is absolutely what she has said is her role. She is supposed to educate all boards and agencies on the use of the open government law. I think the words policy and procedures really should be changed to rules and regulations, and then it might be very, very clear to everybody that that's what these boards are, might be authorized to do. So our only question is a board going to develop the rules and regs, or is the Attorney General or us or anyone, one entity, going to develop the rules and regs for the entire government of Guam open government system? And rules and regs can easily accommodate different technologies. They just, have to be planned that way. But I think if you look at the words policy and procedure and you use the words rules and regs, which I think should be really the words used here, then it's very clear that it should be a procedure that's developed with public input, that the Attorney General reviews to see if it's legal, if it's going to meet the mandates of the open government law or not. I think they're the best ones to do this instead of boards and commissions independently. And then, of course, they're going to come here and be incorporated. Otherwise, it's like cart before the horse. Without spelling out the rules, we're saying you can use teleconferencing as long as you develop any kind of rules. But I don't think that's the intention of this bill. I think the bill, it's very good. It's intended to streamline meetings, to assist these boards, but not to disengage the public from what they're supposed to be doing at these meetings. So again, I would really ask the consideration of my colleagues to shortcut the process instead of having every single board submit rules and regs to the AG as to how they're going to use teleconferencing. And we're going to end up with a huge open government, disparities between different agencies. That we just come up with one policy and any board that wants to take the lead in that, there's nothing to prevent that. They can submit to the AG what they propose, and the AG can use that if that's really, it's just a resource problem. Then the board with the most resources can easily submit that to the AG, and AG can incorporate that and adopt it, you know, as policy for the entire government of Guam. And I don't imagine that the AG's office or anyone who's working on this is going to do this without the Office of Technology or, you know, looking at boards and what specific unique requirements of teleconferencing a board might have. But honestly, I can't see that right now because we're requiring them all to meet the same way. They should be required to teleconference in similar ways. So I would ask that we keep the word, that's my amendment, and I'm asking for my colleagues' support. Thank you.
Suzus Masi, Vice Speaker. We'll now take a vote on the Terlahi amendment. Again, colleagues, this is on page 3, and it's amendments to subsection 43121C and subsections 43122B. All in favor of the Terlahi amendment? Oh, Senator Espadon, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in the closing, and excuse me, but in the closing, so it's a point of information, the closing, the proffer of the amendment mentioned that really what should be looked at is probably a change in terminology, or at least wording of this amendment in terms of developing policy, procedures, and education, and to really reflect rules and regulations. And that was the argument that really the Attorney General should take the lead on that because we're talking rules and regulations. However, in that sense, that difference in terms of making an amendment to this amendment has not been made. So again, there was kind of an implicit contradiction in terms of what we're doing now, because without the change, we're no longer talking about rules and regulations of which the Attorney Generals, as was argued, should be the one in charge of. We're still talking about development of policy, of procedures, and education. The other thing that I want to note that in that closing, right, the proffer of the amendment definitely focused in on the open government law. However, prior to that, the open government law is only a piece of this amendment, and so, you know, of the bill, I should say. So, you know, because the other wording is in accordance with individual missions and functions. So the development of policy, procedures, and education in accordance with individual missions and functions. And then there's an "and" in accordance with the open government law. So those are two separate things. And so to just focus in on just the open government law and ignore the other verbiage, right, definitely then I think lends more to what a previous speaker has said, right, in terms of perhaps we should include the Office of Technology in consultation with the Attorney General's office. So I just want to make that point of information because that is what's before us and that was what was argued. And without any changes, I would also hesitate to have to be able to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Espadon. We'll call for the question.
Point of order, Madam Speaker. I think that was a clear debate on the question, and debate's not allowed after we've closed on the amendment, and it's not a point of information to simply debate the question.
Well, personal privilege then. Because I was not debating it. I was just pointing out that what was said by the closer, right, was as such. That's all I was stating
Senator.
For information.
We'll call for the question.
I'd like to debate also, Madam Speaker, if that's the case. I do intend to make a motion later regarding rules and regulations, but the amendment before us is regarding Attorney Generals creating this teleconferencing policy or every board and commission. And as I said earlier, I think we give our Attorney General's office very little credit if we think that they're going to come up with a policy without consulting with experts in telecommunications. So I just think that's a very, I don't know what point of information that is. That just makes it sound like our Attorney General's office doesn't know what to do, how to create policy.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. We'll call for the question. All of those in favor of the Terlahi amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Amendment fails. Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would move that under the same subsections B and C, C under Section 2 and B under Section 3, that where it says policy procedures, policy, procedures, that be amended to read rules and regulations. The reason why is because it's very vague right now to say that they have some kind of authority to create policy when every other method that they are supposed to be creating in their agencies has to be done by the AAA and the Administrative Adjudication Act, which has very clear mandates of how you create these types of policies for your agency. So I'd ask that we just use the words rules and regulations, and that way it makes it clear that they have to comply. Thank you.
On the Terlahi amendment, any member wish to be heard? Senator Esteves, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just a point of information. Is this to still include the Attorney General's office, and then also include the recommended proposal to change policy and procedures to rules regulations?
Vice Speaker, do you yield to the question? Senator Esteves, do you mind repeating?
I'm making an amendment just to change the words policy and procedures to rules and regulations.
Thank you. And just as a matter of procedure, because the amendment in the motion to amend the bill to replace and substitute boards and commissions to Attorney General's office was an amendment that went before this body and failed. And I think to the point of a previous speaker, that if this was the intent, that the amendment should have been all-inclusive and intact. But the question now before is, there was an amendment, a motion that was brought before this body that had already failed. And so are we revisiting that? Is this, and what I'm saying is because previously there have been decisions made by the speaker that an amendment with the same intent, even though reworded, is still an amendment that, even though it was failed and it wasn't allowed to be brought back before this body. And I'm just wondering, are we changing the way we do things? And so, because it can be argued that the intent for the Attorney General to still be the person who makes the determination for these individual boards was the intent of the motion that was previously moved and previously rejected by this body. And I'm just, again, in terms of just procedurally, I think that argument can still stand, that regardless of whether we're changing policy and procedures to rules and regulations, it still puts the Attorney General as taking the power from the boards and commissions to determine their internal standard operating procedures.
Thank you, Senator. It can be argued.
Point of
it can be argued, but I'll still allow the amendment to take its course. If any other member wishes to be heard on the Terlahi amendment, we'll just move forward with this.
And just for public record, Madam Speaker, I would just like to object and request for a ruling on this, because I think the intent was made very clearly in the previous amendment, and I think this is just a way to substitute or loophole the intent of the previous amendment, which was already
Senator Esteves,
rejected.
you are correct. There was a previous amendment that was offered and failed, and I will allow the Vice Speaker to make this amendment, and it's up to the body on how that will move forward. So if any other member wish to be heard on this Terlahi amendment, if not, Vice Speaker, you're invited to close.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I apologize. Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized, and then we'll have you close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't necessarily have an objection to this amendment, but I just want to say I think we're making things a little bit too complicated. these boards and commissions, most of them, I think if not all of them, have legal counsel at their disposal. Most of them are through the Attorney General's office. And so I would expect that when they do come up with policy, rules, and regulations, that they are guided by legal counsel, and that it's done in a way where it protects the boards and commissions or that agency they represent. So let's keep that in mind. I don't, this is not intended to make it complicated and to, increase bureaucracy in getting this done. So I'm fine with the existing amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Vice Speaker, you're recognized to close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to address some of the concerns that have been raised. I agree the rules and regulations, if they are developed one by every agency, will be developed with whichever counsel that agency consults with. It would be, for example, with the port, they have their lawyer, and then for land management, it would be the Attorney General's office because that's their lawyer. And so this, but that's just a matter of how all our laws work together. That by chance, some of these are going to end up with the AG, and also by rules and regulations process, there's going to be public input into this use of teleconferencing, or developing the procedures for use of teleconferencing. And I just want to point out again that this is a huge departure from the existing open government law, and I just think we should be cautious, and instead of blatant disregard. And the open government law again is intended to protect the public. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Vice Speaker Terlahi. On the Terlahi amendment, we'll call for the question. On the Terlahi amendment, all those in favor of the Terlahi amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Amendment fails. Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just, on the bill in general, I have no further amendments, except just to say that, I've tried my best. I'm just trying to point out that we're talking about the open government law here. We're making a huge shift. I think it's only reasonable and fair that we shift in favor of the public, not the other way. It's not a convenience of boards that is the reason we have an open government law. It's for the information, the participation of the public. And so I'm just really pleading with my colleagues to keep that in mind. We are the safeguards of that. It was the legislature that created open government. Left to the agencies, they had all kinds of different rules of how they were, conducting their business. And we've had this problem, and I just want to recall, it's been a big issue. We've had lawsuits over whether these agencies complied with the open government law. I'm sure you all recall this, and the AG was called on to come in and make it uniform. And that's the only way to avoid those lawsuits, and the only way to, when the lawsuit happens, they're trying to void actions that have taken place in contravention of the open government law. And so I just think this, being very careful with this, being diligent, making the rules uniform, and making them as early on as possible, it's really consistent with the principles of the open government law and the protection of the public's interests in these boards meetings. That's the purpose of why they're having it in public in the first place. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. I'll recognize Senator Castro and then Senator San Nicolas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to start off by saying, by commending the author of the bill. I think it's forward-thinking. I appreciate him for being consistent in wanting to introduce the use of technology and other tools. I just have a couple concerns, and they're not material, but I'm hoping that with this amendment, it helps to serve as a flag, if you will. Madam Speaker, I think the embracing these tools are good. I just want to caution all of us from allowing too much flexibility, in that the use of these tools will become more the rule than the exception. Also, to the credit of the previous speaker, I too see tremendous value in the need to preserve that human interaction. Even more important than that, Madam Speaker, I think, I want to preserve the ability of any member of the community to have the privilege to address their stakeholder in person, face to face and in person. And so with that said, Madam Speaker, I'd like to go ahead and introduce this amendment. It should be already passed out on the floor to lines 7 and 8, page 3, sort of around the same section the previous speaker was on. I'd like to strike, beginning with board, so we'll strike board and commission members may participate in regular and special meetings via teleconferencing, and instead replace it with, from time to time, a board or commission member may petition the chairperson to participate in regular and special meetings via video teleconferencing. The member must submit in writing the justification for not being able to participate on site and in person. Madam Speaker, I think by establishing this procedure, very simple procedure, it establishes maybe a trail, if you will, right? A flag for future reference. I know that there are instances when this is necessary. For example, in some of the regional areas, there are remote campuses, and so the resident director would have to participate through the use of a video teleconference type platform, but that's the exception. I think that if you resort to the use of some kind of remote tool, that it's because you're temporarily incapacitated. You could be off island, you could be ill, you can not have access to public transportation, or it can be an emergency. And so I'd like that to be the stated intent, or at least to reflect in the record that that's the intent upon which I will vote in favor of the bill with the amendment. And so that's my amendment for consideration by the body, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Castro. Just a clarification on the Castro amendment. It's lines 7 and 8 on page 3, not page 8. Senator Esteves, you're recognized on the Castro amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just have some concerns, I think, to just bring to the attention of the body, and more than likely I'll request for a recess to work with my colleague on a potential either fix or compromise. I agree with the nature of the amendment. I think that it should be considered as an option, rather more of the exception than the rule for specific cases, and that the writing and justification be available for public review in a very transparent fashion. However, I think my concern is in striking that first part, board and commission members may participate in regular and special meetings via teleconferencing. That is very key, because it gives the authority by this body for the board or commission that they may participate in a regular or special meeting. And in striking that, while we do have this section in allowing a board or commission member to petition the chairperson, we still haven't granted the authority to the commission or board to conduct the meeting via teleconferencing. So I think a good option would be a way to bridge the two without striking that entire section, because I think that authority needs to be granted for them to participate in this. And so with that, I'd like to request a short recess to confer with my colleagues.
We'll take a 1-minute recess. The legislature is back in session. Senator Esteves, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My colleagues should have a copy of the proposed amendment to the amendment. And what I'm proposing is that we return board and commission members may participate in regular special meetings via teleconferencing, which is as it reads in the bill. Subsequent to that should read, the board or commission member shall submit his written request to participate in regular and special meetings via teleconferencing to the chairperson, period. Such requests must be attached to the minutes of said meeting. And if I can just beg the indulgence of my colleagues, on the second to the last line, it really should read, shall be attached to the minutes of said meeting instead of must. I can make an amendment after we've addressed this amendment to correct that. But right now, it's such requests must be attached to the minutes of said meeting. And again, that's because we want to ensure that if a board or commission member is requesting or unable to participate in person and they're going to be participating via teleconferencing, we want to be very transparent to the public and have on the record as to why they couldn't participate, whether it's a family emergency, they're off island, they're not present. And I think it's very important to the process that the public is aware of when this tool is being utilized. And so I ask my colleagues for the support of the amendment to the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Esteves. And just for clarity for the body, is this an amendment to Senator Castro's amendment, or will he need to withdraw his amendment to now move this forward?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I withdraw my amendment. Thank you.
And so with that, Madam Speaker, I believe that we are on a single amendment that actually, just for procedural sake, I believe then if he withdrew the amendment, then Senator Castro still technically has the floor. But if he would yield to me at this time, thank you, Madam Speaker. So with this, I'm presenting this amendment. Now that we are entertaining one single amendment, I will at this time propose an amendment to this amendment and just change must to the word shall, and that is on the last sentence, such as to read, such a request shall be attached to the minutes of said meeting. I believe, and we can confer, I have no problem with adding a his/her, but I think it's correct me if I'm wrong, I believe in legal readings it's implied, but I can proffer that amendment as well as the amendment to the amendment. So two changes: shall submit his/her written request, and then on the last sentence we'll read, such request shall be attached to the minutes of said meeting.
Thank you, Senator Esteves. Any member wish to be heard on the Esteves amendment? Any member object?
Just to
Senator St. Nicholas, you're recognized.
Just to provide some input, instead of his/her, we can just replace it with a shall submit a written request.
I appreciate the input. Yes, I will go ahead and alter my amendment. So it will read, shall submit a written request to participate in regular and special meetings.
Any member wish to be heard on the Esteves amendment? Any member object? Hearing no objection.
Sorry, can you just clarify, is this the Esteves amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
The Castro amendment was withdrawn.
Yes.
Senator Esteves proffered this amendment
Right, so this
as his own. So we are looking at the Esteves amendment to the bill on page 3, lines 7 and 8, to amend section A of the bill. Any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Senator Esteves, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate my colleague yielding his time to me. However, I do have an amendment being prepared, but at this time, if allowed by the parliamentarian, if I would then now yield my time back to my colleague and then yield my yield to the previous speaker that was, or the other speaker that was in line before me, before I come back. Okay, so just go ahead with mine while I have the floor. All right. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Being passed around is another amendment. I would first like to say that I'd like to commend my colleague on their previous amendments, and I understand the intent of it. However, consulting other colleagues, we want to ensure that we have a product that we can all come to some agreement on and consensus on. And with that, I'm proposing an amendment that pulls from different input from different colleagues. And what it proposes to do is bring back the recommendation and amendment to change policy procedures to rules and regulations, but further to add, in consultation with the Office of Technology and the Office of Attorney General. While I do believe that boards and commissions should have a bit more autonomy and flexibility to determine the rules and regulations that speak to them, that they need in order to operate in the most efficient way possible, taking into account the various differences in all of the boards via makeup and requirements. I think it's also important, and I do agree, that the Office of Technology, which is a publicly funded agency and that we've established to assist with these types of forward-thinking and technological ventures, and then also include the Office of Attorney General to ensure that even though we have in statute that the individual boards and commissions should be in compliance and shall be in compliance with the open government law, we want to ensure that the Office of the Attorney General has input and that the boards and commissions are utilizing the resources we have at hand to ensure we're doing everything is on par. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Esteves. Any member wish to be heard on the Esteves amendment? Any member wish to be heard? Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to support this amendment. I think it makes sense, and this is something I was trying to get at earlier with the previous amendment. Boards and commissions are not all the same. Some boards and commissions may not elect to participate in video teleconferencing. And so by leaving it, giving them the flexibility and the autonomy deserved by these boards and commissions, then I think that's the right way to do it, to have them create policy that is focused on their mission and to do it this way. So I rise again in support and thank my colleague for this amendment.
Thank you, Senator. Any other member wish to be heard? Any objections to the Esteves amendment? Hearing none, motion carries. Senator Esteves, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And with that, I'd just like to lend further support to this bill. As previously stated by retiring speakers, this bill is definitely forward-thinking, and it's a solution that's not going to come at a great expense to the people of Guam. But we've historically have seen issues with boards meeting quorum, not only because the boards are not full to capacity, but understanding that the members were pulling from outside. These are not positions that are fully compensated in terms of the time it takes away from the board members. And we want to try to make it easier while respecting the open government law and the practices set forth by this body, and to ensure transparency to the public. But we want to try to find ways that we can meet in the middle to ensure that these boards are able to meet quorum, that they're able to function, and so that the rest of the government operations, initiatives, and policies aren't held up by these boards' lack of quorum and inability to meet for various reasons. And so with that, I'd like to thank the author and all of the colleagues who have provided amendments to this piece of legislation and rise in support. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Esteves. On the main motion, Senator San Nicolas, you're recognized. On the main motion, any other senator wish to be heard? On the main motion? If not, Senator Rodriguez, you're invited to close. On the motion to move the bill down, Bill 292 down to the voting file, any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Senator Muña, you're recognized.
Madam Speaker, can we reconsider that last vote? I thought my colleague was going to proffer the amendment that he passed out. And if not, no, there's one by WMC, and if he...
We'll take a brief recess.
Did we miss something?
Senator Castro, you have the floor. Oh, we're back in session. Senator Castro, you have the floor.
Are we back?
I don't think there's.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I believe there was an amendment passed out on the last bill. And so just in following parliamentary procedure, I'd like to ask the body and make a motion to reconsider and move Bill 294 with all amendments intact back to the second reading.
Any objection to reconsidering? No objection.
Correction, 292, Madam Speaker.
292. Any objection?
And with that,
No objection.
I know I still have the floor. I'd like to yield to my colleague.
Senator Castro,
Thank you,
you're
Madam
recognized.
Speaker. Again, just for the record, the bill on its face is meritable. But thanks to the urging of my colleagues, there's some consensus in the need to insert the following amendment. I'd like to submit it for consideration. An amendment to line 15, page 3, the addition of a new section that reads, executive sessions and due process hearings shall not be conducted via these methods. In a nutshell, Madam Speaker, just by the very nature of those types of discussions, they're very privileged discussions, and the use of this type of a platform, in my opinion, doesn't put into place the necessary safeguards against unauthorized recording or other types of involvements of persons, especially on sensitive issues such as personnel matters or matters that are legal in nature. So with that said, thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity.
Does everyone have a copy of the motion? Can you read the motion one more time, please? The amendments.
Thank you. So the amendment that's passed out should include new language. I'll read the amendment in full. New subsection D. Executive sessions and due process hearings shall not be conducted via these methods. Again, the insertion of the language and due process hearings into that amendment that's been circulated. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
On the amendment, is there, Senator San Nicolas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I can understand due process hearings, but I'm a little confused as to why executive sessions would be not included in these methods, because executive sessions are not conducted with the public. The public is actually not a part of an executive session. And so if we can do a teleconference executive session, I think that would help move executive session matters forward, as opposed to forcing all members to be present for a quorum in a physically present meeting, only to go into executive session and ask the room to be cleared out. So perhaps we can say due process hearings shall not be by these methods, but executive sessions, I think, are absolutely one of the things that can be done by these methods, because the public is not a party to executive session. If the mover of the amendment can clarify why executive sessions would be excluded.
Senator Castro, do you yield?
I do, thank you. And so again, just from my vantage point, I sat in dozens of executive sessions, both as a staffer or as a member of a public board, in this case, the EOG Board of Regents. And in my opinion, I think that the sanctity of those discussions, the privilege of being able to discuss it openly, and not to leave any room for misinterpretation or other things to happen as a result of the potentiality when you use a platform like video conference. I appreciate the previous speaker's concerns, and they're legitimate, but I just don't support the amendment, but thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the amendment? Senator Esteves, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this amendment, and again, understanding that hearings regarding due process and executive sessions are not open to the public for very specific reasons, and this is not unique to Guam. But I think the importance of not having it teleconference or via teleconference is important, I think, to more towards cybersecurity, and I think that's vital. Considering this day and age that a lot of our platforms and as Office of Technology is still building up, and the systems we're using some are open source, but the security is just not there to ensure the protection required for due process hearings and executive sessions. So I think right now, not allowing this as a matter of the process is important until we can have further guarantees that the cybersecurity is there to protect the confidentiality of these types of meetings and processes. So with that, I do rise in support of this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. On the amendment, is there anyone else who would like to be heard? If not, we'll call for, is there any objection to the amendment? Any objection? No objection, amendment carries. On the bill, is there a motion? Senator Rodriguez, could you repeat your motion regarding, or on the bill, sorry, on the underlying motion to place the bill in third reading? Is there any objection? No objection, motion carries. We're now recognize Senator Luis Borja Muña.
Madam Speaker, I move that Bill number 302-34, as substituted on the floor, be accepted by the body. This version of the bill that was passed out to everyone was worked on by me and my staff and legal counsel, and it has specific definitions for qualified patients as it is in the original law, and also defines designated caregiver specifically for this section.
All right, so there's a motion to substitute on the floor Bill 302, and that we are going to proceed with discussions on that substituted version. On the substituted version, does everyone have a copy? On the motion to substitute?
Susan Masi, Madam Speaker, if the author of the bill could just note what the changes are from the original.
Senator Muña, do you yield?
Yes, Madam Speaker. So there were several technical changes that really are not substantive to the intent of the bill, but I think the main section that we want to focus on is on page 1, line 10, for the purpose of this section, defining section B, item 1, qualified patient. And that basically says that it's just following the original law. And then item number 2, defining patient's designated caregiver. And that one has a whole section there which you can actually take a look at. That's substantially different from the original bill that is introduced.
Is there any objection to the bill being substituted on the floor for purposes of second reading? Any objection? No objection. So we will now proceed with the substituted version of Bill 302-34.
Madam Speaker, I move that the substituted Bill 302 be placed in the third reading file, and I'd like to speak on it.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I couldn't sleep last night. First of all, I just want to say I couldn't sleep last night. I thought about, who I'm going to talk about here, but I think maybe, really, I think what we need to focus on is that it's been 4 years since the Joaquin Casey Conception II Compassionate Cannabis Use Act was approved by 19,692 voters of Guam as public law. In the last 4 years, not a single chronically ill patient has received a single dose of medicinal cannabis on Guam. Medicinal cannabis has been delayed for amendments to the law, waiting for rules and regulations to be adopted, and now, by the lack of laboratories to test locally grown cannabis for pesticides, parasites, fungus, and also for potency. Bill number 302-34 makes no more changes to our laws or rules and regulations. 302 is a stopgap measure that says that at any time that Guam does not have an operating dispensary, that qualified patients or their designated caregivers are permitted to grow their own medicinal cannabis. No more delays and no more excuses. Our patients are tired and frustrated, and some have even died waiting. I've heard some people express that homegrown cannabis could get into the wrong hands. Well, so can cannabis dispensed from a dispensary. It's no different from somebody getting medicine from a pharmacy. The existing law already restricts the transfer of medicinal cannabis to unqualified persons. Our controlled substance laws prohibit the transfer of any controlled substance to any person to whom the drug is not prescribed. Subsection 122505 of the original medicinal cannabis law contains existing prohibitions, restrictions, and also limitations for cannabis use and possession. Madam Speaker, this bill is simple, has no delays for rules and regulations. I have the 161 pages of rules and regs that we passed earlier for this term. This is enough. I stress again, no more delays and no more excuses. All this bill really is saying is that how qualified patients can get a grower's permit and the conditions of the permit. That's all it's saying. I would like to offer one amendment, though, as a result of the recommendations from the public hearing. On page 3, lines 14 and 15. Page 3. Right now, it currently reads, if I can just read 13 through 15, item number 1. The qualified patient or the patient's designated caregiver shall possess no more than 3 flowering mature plants and no more than 6 juvenile plants at any given time. I'd like that to read, now and change to that the qualified patient or patient's designated caregiver possesses no more than 6 flowering plants at any given time. Madam Speaker, medicinal cannabis jurisdictions that allow home cultivation of cannabis use terms like adult, juvenile, or seedlings when referring to cannabis cultivation. There are no definitions in most of these laws for these terms. For practical purposes, medicinal cannabis is harvested only from flowering plants. When the flowers or quote-unquote buds are harvested, the stems and leaves are disposed of just as the grower would dispose of non-flowering plants. So I'd like the body to consider that amendment. Again, the amendment would read on lines 13 through 15 that the qualified patient or patient's designated caregiver possesses no more than 6 flowering plants at any given time.
On the amendment, Senator Atta, on the amendment, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I guess I need to go back a couple of pages, and because in this substitute bill, we have defined a designated caregiver as the caregiver who will be allowed to grow the cannabis for the patient. I guess my understanding is that, you know, with the requirements that you have to grow it either indoors or outdoor. If you're going to do it outdoors, it's got to be covered so that it's not in full view of the public. I imagine it's going to have to be secured. At least just from what I've read, there's some special care that goes into this, and so there's some investment that's involved. And so I can imagine what's to keep me as being a designated caregiver for patient 1, patient 2, patient 10 patients, probably. And conceivably that I could do that because all I'm doing is I'm just going to grow cannabis for them. I'll visit them once a week and deliver the product to them, and then go back and grow some more. So the way it stands right now, though, is that designated caregiver can only grow the 3 plants or the 6 plants, however many. So what happens if I'm the designated caregiver for 10 patients? I don't have 10 locations. I should be able to grow for each of those patients, such that then in that location where I'm growing, I should be allowed to grow 6 plants for each patient, or a total of 60 plants. Otherwise, you know, let's face it, if somebody's going to make the investment to do that, you've got to make it worthwhile. So I think we've got to address that, and I would propose, we'll probably have to take a little recess to do that, but I would propose that we divide, or actually create a second paragraph, such that the first paragraph should just read, the qualified patient is limited to 6 flowers, or whatever, 6 plants. And then a second paragraph that says that the designated caregiver shall be allowed to possess or cultivate no more than X number of plants per patient. And then I think that resolves that limitation issue. That's how I would propose that we change this. But I think if we change that, I certainly would be in support of the bill. But I would leave the amendment of that as proposed to the author if she so accepts. And I would leave it at that. Thank you.
On the bill, is there anyone else who would like to be recognized on the bill? Senator Nicholas, you're... Sorry, on the Munya amendment. Okay.
Madam
yes, sorry.
Speaker, we're actually on the amendment to change the amount of flowering plants.
Yes.
And I think the retiring speaker's concern was addressed to the amount of flowering plants based on how many patients, qualified patients, a caregiver can service. And so maybe what we could do is we could address this amendment and then address the retiring speaker's concern.
Thank you. On the amendment, Senator Nicholas, you are recognized on the Luis Munya amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Strictly on the amendment, I share some of the concerns of the retiring speaker. There is nothing in the bill that mandates any kind of supervised or regulated destruction of unused product. So for example, let's say I'm the designated caregiver. I have 24 or I have 20 patients who I grow for, and I grow 6 plants for each. I have 120 flowering plants, you know, and they use it on a semi-regular basis. Some of them travel, some of them don't use up as much. There's nothing to regulate the quantity that I produce and the destruction of that product so that it doesn't get out into the greater community. Even 3 flowering plants poses the same risk. Raising it to 6 just increases production volume and does not increase accountability in any sense. While on the surface, the bill looks like it's innocuous in that we're only going to be allowing for, you know, people who are ill to grow the plants they need to take care of themselves, this actually opens up a whole new back door for us to have professional growers who are growing for these patients. And at the end of the day, you know, cultivation of cannabis is not something casual. What's going to be the incentive for these designated caregivers who are growing for these large groups? I think that it only further opens the door for black market activity to monetize the unused product as a secondary form of compensation for the designated caregiver. There is no compensatory language written into the bill. And so I'm concerned about increasing the number of plants up to 6 plants. I'm concerned with the original number, 3 plants. I have other concerns of the bill that I'll speak on later. But increasing it to 6 in light of what was also raised by the previous speaker, and in light of there not being any kind of regulatory component to ensure destruction of harvested plants or product, flowers, I think it poses a risk for the community. We don't even have any real data, and remember, we're talking about medicinal cannabis in the context of a medicine. We don't even have any real data on what the utilization rates are going to be for these particular patients. We started out with 3 flowering plants, now we're doubling it to 6, but how many is actually needed? Is there going to be a variance in the quantity of product produced depending on the grower, so that 6 plants is more than enough for 3 patients, and yet they're able to grow 18 plants worth of product with no accountability for destroying what is unused and ensuring it doesn't go out into a black market sales environment. There's a lot of risk. I'll speak more on the greater risk with respect to the overall bill, but increasing the number of plants is going to exacerbate that risk. So I wanted to raise that concern and object to the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Sundquist, did you say that was a concern and not an objection, or and an objection? Thank you. On the amendment, Senator Lee, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to rise and express full support of home cultivation and certainly in improving access for our people to medicinal marijuana. I think that people who are sick, people who are suffering, especially from very chronic illnesses or, continuous pain, should be given the medicine that they need. I think I agree with the author, our people have waited far too long on this issue that they already voted for a long time ago. But in response to this amendment, I have a question for the author if she'll yield. So it's my understanding that several stakeholders have expressed concern with the supply of cannabis that this measure would provide. And according to Public Law 32-237, an adequate supply is determined as a quote-unquote 3-month supply. So I just wanted to ask how the sponsor arrived at the specific number of plants in this measure. So we're moving from 3 flowering plants to 6, and I just kind of wanted to get a little bit of insight and some information on how that specific number of plants was arrived at. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Muñoz, do you yield? Thank you.
I just want to state for the record that I learned a lot about cannabis just with the introduction of this bill, and how to grow and what to grow and the process of growing. And even to this day, I can't specifically talk about it because I've never done it before, but I can only express what some of the people have told me about how a juvenile plant turns into a flowering plant, and you can only use the flowering plant, the female flowering plant, and you can't tell whether it's going to be female until it flowers. And so by limiting the amount of juvenile plants, you're limiting the amount of supply that may be provided to the patient. So we came up with the standard 6, and I have a list of all the places that do allow home cultivation throughout the United States and the District of Columbia that has a standard of 6 plants. And so we use that as a standard because of those 6 plants, you can tell which of those 6 plants are female and which are usable for the patient.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just have a follow-on question. I just want it to be clear. So we're on page 3 of the bill, line 13. The qualified patient or the patient's designated caregiver shall possess no more than, now it's 6 flowering mature plants, and then there's a period. So are we removing this no more than 6 juvenile plants at any given time?
Yes. So we're taking out the part that says no more than 3 flowering mature plants and 6 juvenile plants, and we're just replacing it with no more than 6 flowering plants at any given time. So really, they can grow an unlimited amount, but they can only have 6 flowering plants at any given time.
The words at any given time will remain.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Thank you, and I thank the author.
I'd like to, Madam Speaker, if I can, address the disposal.
No, just if you don't mind, if there anyone else who would like to speak on the amendment? If not, Senator Espadon.
I'm still not sure where I'm going with this bill. I understand the intent of its introduction, and but just some words that were spoken by the author of this bill and the ramifications on this the specific language is now being proffered as an amendment. And what was said is that bottom line shall possess no more than 6 flowering plants at any given time, period, with no discussion now on 6 juvenile plants. And so that leaves it very open. In other words, and the reason for that was because, as was explained, you don't know if you have a female plant that will flower until they flower. But by leaving that open, then the potential to actually start up 100 juvenile plants and still possess 6 flowering plants, I think really kind of for me, it raises some concerns, right? Because now there's no limitation on the number of juvenile plants that could actually be propagated. Again, knowing full well that you don't know whether it's going to be a female flowering plant until they flower, at least according to the explanation. But now that we have the possibility that a grower, a caregiver, or a patient could actually plant an endless amount, that begs the question that was answered before as to, okay, what if they do grow 100 plants, not knowing full well whether they're mature or whether they're female and will flower, and they find out that they're going to be more than 6 flowering plants. The question asked previously, what happens and what is the disposal of those other flowering plants beyond 6? And it raises a concern for me, because now there is no limitation in terms of how many plants can you actually have on premise. And I just bring that out as a matter of concern. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. On the amendment, and is there anyone else who would like to be recognized on the amendment? Senator Esteves, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I appreciate the discussion on the matter. And, you know, I put a lot of research in this, and I do support the amendment that in order to provide adequate supply, you would require at least 6 flowering plants to provide the consistent supply throughout the year. I do acknowledge the arguments regarding juvenile plants. You know, it's something that I've been considering, as well as the disposal aspect. But let's not lose sight of what the intent of the piece of legislation is, and I'll go into further detail with regards to helping the patients. And so with that, in order to keep the discussion moving forward and try to help promote support, I'd like to propose an amendment to the amendment that after the proposed amendment of 6 flowering plants, add the line or return the line regarding juvenile plants with the quantity at 12. And this is understanding that there's about a 50% chance of whether or not the flower is going to be male or female. Again, we can address other issues concerning the bill, but I think 12 is a fair number, ensuring statistically at about a 50% ratio, you should have 6 mature plants that are available for harvesting and 6 plants that are useless. So I think a fair compromise would be 12 juvenile plants, maintaining the quantity required for adequate patient use at 6 mature flowering plants.
On the Esteves amendment to the amendment, Senator Nelson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's very unclear what the amendment to the amendment is. So just a point of order, are we going to dispense of the current amendment, and is he making another amendment, or does he want to add an amendment to the amendment? Because I heard 2 different statements. Perhaps we can clarify that and really see in writing what the amendment to the amendment is. I think we went off on a tangent, when the mover of the amendment to the amendment was trying to state his case.
It's an amendment to the amendment. requesting that it be put in writing?
That's my point, Madam Speaker, is I don't know because there was a tangent. So if we can see what the amendment to the amendment is.
That's what I'm asking.
Yes.
You want it in writing. All right. Just give us, we'll take a 1-minute recess. All right, we're back in session. The amendment is being passed out. Who had the floor? Senator Esteves, you had the floor last, and we were on your amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With the understanding and consulting with my colleagues, there will be another amendment being pushed out. So with that, I'm going to withdraw my amendment to the amendment and yield the floor back to my colleague.
All right, we are now on the original amendment by Senator Muña. Senator Muña, I understand you have a motion.
Yes, Madam Speaker, thank you. I'd also like to withdraw my original amendment and proffer another amendment that addresses both the two previous speakers.
Is there any objection to the withdrawal of both of those amendments and substituting with this one amendment? All right, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So this new amendment, and everyone should have a copy of this, addresses both senators' concerns about the designation of how many plants should be made. So the new amendment would be to lines 13 through 15 on page 3. Section 1, the qualified patient shall possess no more than 6 flowering plants and no more than 12 juvenile plants at any given time. Shall I go on with the next slide?
No.
What do you want?
Does everybody have a copy of the amendment? I think we can take it as one unless there's an objection. Senator Nicholas on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this amendment effectively doubles what the previous amendment was trying to do. Now for a single patient, that single patient can have 6 plants of their own flowering, plus 6 plants with their designated caregiver. I'll call it their grower. Their grower can have 6, they can have 6 for a total of 12 flowering plants at any given time. You know, oftentimes we try and shy away from speaking too much about, you know, what we are familiar with. A flowering plant is going to put out a lot of cannabis. 12 flowering plants, that means you have 1 flowering plant for every month of the year. The way the bill is written, it also doesn't create any kind of limitation on how much harvest you have. And so let's say I'm a designated caregiver. I'm growing for a multiple number of patients. My patients are all growing theirs too. And all of a sudden the inspector is going to start coming around. We can just harvest right there on the spot. Harvest all of it and then just kind of put it in the corner. There's nothing wrong with that because there's no limitation on how much harvested stock you can have. The original voter initiative that brought us to this point, Madam Speaker, is years old, and the government has not moved forward fast enough, and now it's causing us to entertain bills and amendments like these. But I'm very concerned about moving in a direction that's going to compromise the original intent that our people themselves authorized for us. And that original intent was to create an environment for medicinal cannabis. Now we're going to allow for 6 flowering plants for a patient, plus another 12 juvenile, plus 6 more for their caregiver, and another 12 juvenile. So for one patient, we can have 6, 12, 24, 36 plants. 36 plants for one patient at any given moment. How can we not be concerned that the product is going to make its way into the market for purposes other than medicinal use? Which takes me to another area of concern. Because while a patient may designate a caregiver, there's no requirements for that caregiver to be able to return to that patient a product that is consistent with what their medical needs might be. There is no testing. There is nothing to validate the efficacy of the product. It's like saying we're taking so long to get our own antibiotics program here on Guam. Let's just let people make their own. And let's let them designate somebody to make their own. And by the way the bill is written, while you cannot give out cannabis to non-patients, you can give them out to other patients. It's written in there that, I'm getting a curious look, I'll just quickly cite it. Page 2, line 25, not to divert cannabis to anyone who is not allowed to possess. So you can divert to somebody who is. So it's like saying, make your own antibiotic, pick somebody who you want to make antibiotic for you, and you guys can all share the antibiotics that you're making. Nothing with regard to efficacy, nothing with regard to true medicine. Each patient's needs are going to be different. Sometimes you need a 250 milligram amoxicillin, and sometimes you need a 500 milligram azithromycin. But now we're just going to say, not only home cultivate, but home cultivate to such a quantity and with such an open-ended arena of exchange that we're not only saying, never mind the pharmacy, we're saying go ahead and make your own and go ahead and pass your pills all over the place regardless of, I mean, really? And I'm concerned about moving in this direction, Madam Speaker, because our people gave us a very clear mandate for medicinal cannabis. I want to honor that mandate. And as we encounter more hurdles to bring the medicine here that our people wanted us to bring, we shouldn't, in the course of trying to overcome those hurdles, compromise the medicinal mandate by opening the door for so much product, all unregulated. There's nothing to account for how much was harvested. There's nothing to account for how much was used by the patient. There's nothing to account for whether or not what was harvested and what was not used was destroyed. If we want to do recreational cannabis, then let's just move forward with that and see how our people feel about it. But this is pretty much going to really open the door for that. And then we have to also be further concerned because as we have so much product now under this new regime, why would anybody make the necessary investments to actually build a laboratory and open up a dispensary and be fully regulated when there's a huge unregulated environment already operating? How will we ever get to the medicine that our people wanted us to bring when we've opened up 36 plants worth per person and have it being shared all over the place without any regard to potency, efficacy? I want to honor the mandate of our people to do the medicinal component. It's going to require investment. This will definitely make the investment, I mean, no one's going to want to put in the millions of dollars for all those equipments when everybody's already doing it this way. So we just need to be very careful about volumes and quantities that this amendment represents, and just very careful about how this amendment in context of the greater bill is going to actually have a very adverse impact on the medicinal mandate that our people have given us. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. On the amendment, it's an objection. There's an objection. Is there any other speaker on the amendment? Senator Esteves, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support to the amendment. I think regardless of speculation and the fantastical numbers, let's not lose sight of what this is supposed to do, and it's to provide an adequate supply of medication to our people who need it. That was the mandate. For this government to provide a resource, for this government to provide the medicine to the people who need it, who in many cases don't have a lot of time left and are suffering. That's what the intent is. So to throw out fantastical numbers that have no merit, 36 plants, yeah, okay, that's a word, 36 weeds, 36 trees. But it's been said time and time again.
Just a point of information,
the
Madam
data
Speaker.
is there.
If you just add up the numbers in the amendment, it's 36 plants.
I have the floor,
Please
Madam
proceed.
Speaker.
Yes, you do.
But it's been said time and time again, only a mature flowering plant can provide the medication. Everything else is a weed. Everything else is useless. So to throw out this number to scare the public, 36 plants out there going out, increasing drug use on the island, is ridiculous. We can't lose the sight of what the intent of the bill is. And the bill is very clear. Why? The reason there's a designated caregiver is because the qualified patient, although allowed to grow, who would be allowed to grow under this bill, may not be able to do it because they have a medical condition, because they're suffering, because they're in pain, hence the need for a designated caregiver. So to throw out this crazy reading of the statute that somehow a designated caregiver is a random grower in the middle of a place, read the bill. It's very clear the designated caregiver is growing on behalf of the patient with all the requirements of the patient, and all they are acting as is a proxy to the patient. So regardless of what's being said, the bill is very clear. If this amendment passes, it would be 6 plants. Only 6 plants per patient, whether they use a proxy of a caregiver or they grow it themselves. 6 plants capable of producing the medication. And anything being said otherwise is a complete lie, because the facts are the facts. These are things that are known. These are not made up facts.
Point of information, Madam Speaker. The amendment clearly says the qualified patient shall possess no more than 6.
I'm going to allow him to finish. We'll take up your point of information when he's finished.
Now,
false,
if there's an amendment to try to correct the language, keeping the intent of what the bill is supposed to do, then let those amendments come forward. But to try to tear apart and throw fantasies out, to try to kill it, to try to kill the intent, to try to kill the ability for these patients to get something. If there was a process that could be set up right now, we probably would have done it. And we can sit on our behinds all day long talking about whose fault is it, why it couldn't happen. But until we take that step forward to try to provide the medicine, we can always come back. We've said it on many occasions, this body, we can always come back. That by the very nature of this body is to be able to come back and re-look at a situation as times change and readdress the issues. But to completely ignore that there are patients who need this medication right now is an injustice. It is a travesty. And it sickens me that we're even considering that. Instead of trying to be productive to make this bill better, instead of trying to understand the issues that people have with it, we're going to create fantasies that are not accurate, that are not based in fact, that are not based in merit whatsoever. And I just want to end on that point, Madam Speaker, that let us not lose fact of the intent. There are serious drug concerns out there. I get it. And they are coming through our border. But it's not cannabis. It's not cannabis destroying families on the daily. And so we can sit here all day and talk about where our priorities are, what we think is important, get caught up in the politics. But I will not stand by and see us lose sight of what the intent is, and to ignore the people who need this today, who need it yesterday. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
All right, on the amendment, is there any other speaker on the amendment? If not, Senator Muñoz, you may close.
Madam Speaker, I was hoping that maybe I can address this amendment as a whole, because then it would have addressed some of the concerns that were brought up from the prior speaker. If we can go back to the bill on page 1, line 7, it says patient or a patient's designated caregiver, or. Now, if this will satisfy the previous speaker who has some concerns, we can actually add in the word or after item number 1. But it already states it on the bill here. It doesn't say and, which means we're not going to add on plants per patient, per caregiver. It says or, so it's either or.
All right, you may close on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So in item number 1, it does say the qualified patient. And the reason why we added the 12 juvenile plants is because it addressed one of the other previous speakers about that they can grow 100 plants. So we're not going to do that. We're going to limit it now to 12 juvenile plants, and now only 6 flowering plants. It still stays the same. It really does. With a 50% chance that those juvenile plants are going to produce 6 flowering plants. 50% chance. Maybe not. Maybe those 12 plants are all going to be male plants, and then we're back to square one again. So this is the reason why I wanted originally to keep it open, so that we know that we at least have 6 flowering plants. But if it's going to satisfy the body to limit the 12 juvenile plants with the hope that 50% of those plants are going to produce medicine for the qualified patient, then I'm okay with that. That's addressing item number 1. I don't know, shall we just dispose of that first before we go on to item number 2?
No, there was no objection to considering this as a whole, so
okay.
we're going to vote on it as a whole.
Okay, so I'd like to, Madam Speaker, speak on item number 2 as well, too, and this was addressing one of the other senators who would like to separate the ability of the amount of plants between the patient or the qualified caregiver, designated caregiver. So item number 2 is the patient's designated caregiver shall possess no more than 6 flowering plants and no more than 12 juvenile plants per patient at any given time. So we separated that one paragraph and gave the amount of plants to grow for the patient or the amount of plants to grow for the caregiver.
All right. On the amendment, there's been an objection, so all in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. All in favor of the amendment. Amendment fails. On the bill, Senator Muñoz, you still have the floor.
Madam Speaker, we're trying to make this bill as perfect as possible. And in the meantime, the people that we're actually trying to serve with this bill are waiting. So, like the previous speaker said, let's honor our people's request. 4 years later, they still don't have it. They don't. And we're going to keep trying to make it perfect. I don't want anybody to misunderstand the fact that I don't want a lab. I do. I do believe that we need to have a lab. Every specific patient has a specific need, and we don't know that. We don't know that. And if we're going to keep pretending that we know that, then they're never going to get the medicine in their hands. And that's really what this is all about.
Senator Munoz, you will be allowed to close on the bill also?
Right. If I could take a brief recess, Madam Speaker.
All right. Would you object to allowing others to speak on the bill right now?
Yes, please, yes.
All right, so on the bill, and we'll come back to you to close. On the bill, is there any other person wishing to speak on the bill? Senator Lee.
Sujus Masi, Madam Speaker. I just want to restate my support for home cultivation and certainly improving our access to our people to this medicine, to medical marijuana. I think that I just want to reiterate that there are people in our community, there are people in our families that are suffering, and they should be given the medicine that they so desperately need. And I agree with the author that our people have waited for far too long. I just have some very serious concerns, and some of the concerns that were raised during the public hearing. And so if the author can yield to a few questions, one of the concerns that was raised was specific to adding more measures to the bill that would discourage diversion to minors and further kind of pushing patients to a black market. And so I want to note that states like Washington and Colorado have designated mechanisms to track legal cultivation and production. So that would reduce the diversion of marijuana to this illegal market. So I noticed that the measure that was reported out and the measure that we accepted this morning, the substitute version, still doesn't contain those changes. And so I wanted to inquire with the sponsor about the position on this and why a provision like this, a measure like this to really focus on discouraging diversion, especially to our young people, especially to children, why it wasn't ultimately included in the final measure. And I will note that on page 3 of the bill, there is a section that kind of describes that cannabis plants can be cultivated in outdoor areas secured by a locked gate. So I do want to note that there's that in the bill, but I just wanted to ask about additional measures to discourage diversion, especially to children, if the author would yield.
If you could also look at page 2, line 24, there's also a section there. But Senator Munoz, do you yield to the question?
Yes, Madam Speaker. Just as you pointed out in page 2, line 24, there is a section 3E there, the statement signed by the qualified patient pledging not to divert cannabis to anyone who is not allowed to possess cannabis pursuant to this article. Now, I'm not sure if maybe the previous speaker would like it to be more specific to children, but I think that kind of addresses anyone.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Lee.
Yes, so that's on page 4, and it's subsection E, qualified patient or patient's designated caregiver is not authorized to cultivate cannabis. And is that the section that you were referring to?
Page 2.
Page 2, line 24.
So what happens if they can sign the pledge? What happens if they don't keep to their word? What's the penalty for that? Doesn't really say anything about that on page 2.
Is that a question you would like her to yield to, Senator Lee?
Not necessarily. I'm just stating that, there are other measures that are in place in other states, as I had mentioned, in both Washington and California, that would really put more teeth into this measure to ensure that our children are protected, that people who shouldn't have access to these plants don't have access. So, I share a previous speaker's concern that there might be flowering plants that are not destroyed afterwards. And it seems like there's a lot of wiggle room here. And I just want to be very clear, and I want to make sure that while our patients get the medicine that they need, that we're also protecting the rest of the public, and especially our children, from accessing these substances. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, if I may.
I guess, please proceed. I was going to ask for other speakers on the bill. Are there any other speakers on the bill? Senator Munya, did you want to address that?
I just wanted to address her concerns. Now, Madam Speaker, already there is an existing law for any controlled substance. Already. Our controlled substance laws prohibit the transfer of any controlled substance to any person to whom the drug is not prescribed. Already there's an existing law. So I think they already understand what the consequences are if they don't do it. They've already signed it. Now there is in the current medical cannabis law, there is a destruction and disposal section in this law. Now, if we want to be more specific to home cultivation, then I'm open to providing that particular segment into this bill. And so if that's what we're worried about disposal and destruction, we can actually incorporate that into this too and make it more specific. And if that would address some of the concerns of the previous speaker, then I'm willing to address that as well too.
We're going to take a 1-minute recess. 1 minute. Okay, we're back in session. All right, we're going to take a recess until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Thank you.